At 11:06 a.m., I found out my son was in a coma. At 11:24, my mom threatened to cut off his college fund because I refused to leave the hospital. My name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 36 years old, a single mom. And that morning in Scottsdale, Arizona, the ground beneath me gave way. I was rinsing dishes in the sink, half listening to a podcast when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't pick up, but I did. And a calm, practiced voice said, "Is this Rachel Monroe? This is Mercy Medical. Your son Ethan was brought in from a bike accident. It's serious. We need you here right away." The plate in my hand shattered in the sink, and so did the life I knew. Just 30 minutes earlier, Ethan, my bright-eyed 11-year-old son, who talks more about octopuses than any human I know, had hugged me goodbye, sneakers half-tied, and told me he was off to bike the canal trail with his best friend, Mason. He promised to be back before dinner. Now, he was in surgery. I don't remember grabbing my keys, just the scream that clawed out of me in the car, the red lights I ran, the way my hands shook so violently I could barely sign the ER papers. The nurse didn't sugarcoat it. Severe head trauma, fractured ribs, a punctured lung. We've induced a coma to reduce brain swelling. The next 48 hours are critical. I nodded, numb, then stumbled into the ICU like a ghost of myself. Ethan was unrecognizable, bandaged, bruised, a ventilator rising and falling in place of his breath. I reached for his hand. It was cold. I whispered, "It's Mom. I'm here." And I meant it. But what I didn't expect was what came next. Because while my son fought to stay alive, my own mother, Barbara, called to demand I leave the hospital to attend my sister's birthday brunch. And when I refused, she followed through on her threat. She cut off Ethan's college fund. I never imagined love and loyalty would pull me in opposite directions. But when they did, I knew who I had to stand beside. What would you do if it were your child lying in that hospital bed? The ICU felt like another world. Fluorescent lights buzzed above. Monitors beeped in uneven rhythms. Nurses whispered in low tones, moving with the kind of urgency that never looks panicked, but never rests. I sat by Ethan's bed, barely breathing myself. His head was wrapped in thick gauze. A long, angry bruise ran down the side of his face. Tubes ran from his arms, his nose, his chest. A machine breathed for him. This was my son, my Ethan. The boy who once asked if turtles could live forever, because it seems unfair they don't. The boy who always held the door for strangers without being told. Now he lay still, and I had no idea if he'd ever wake up. I must have been sitting there for hours before a nurse gently touched my shoulder. "You should eat something," she said softly. "Even just water." I nodded, but didn't move. Then my phone buzzed again. It was my mother. At first I thought, finally. Maybe she's calling to ask how Ethan is. Maybe she's booked a flight. Maybe she cares. I answered. Her tone was crisp, distant. Rachel, I need you in Newport Beach tomorrow. Michelle's birthday brunch starts at 2. I blinked. Thought I misheard. Mom, Ethan's in a coma. I know, she said. And I'm sorry. But the doctors are doing everything they can, right? You being there won't change the outcome. She said it like I was being emotional, like this was optional, like motherhood was negotiable. I'm not leaving him. There was silence. Then she sighed. If you don't show up tomorrow, I'll have to reconsider your access to Ethan's college fund. We need to support family who show up. It didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a transaction. Like Ethan's education had become a bargaining chip. Because I refused to abandon him for mimosas and cupcakes. My throat tightened. My fingers went cold. Did you just threaten your grandson's future because I won't come to brunch? Rachel, she said sharply. Don't make this dramatic. I ended the call. Then I blocked her number. For a moment, the quiet in that room became deafening. I looked at Ethan's small, fragile frame, and something shifted in me. This wasn't just a bad moment between mother and daughter. This was the final line. A lifetime of control, comparisons, conditional love, everything Barbara had ever wrapped in the word family. It ended here. Because if there was ever a moment to choose who I wanted to be, it was now. A knock on the door broke the silence. It was Mason's mom, Ethan's friend. She held out a bag with fresh clothes and whispered, "We're all praying for him." I nodded, the tears finally spilling over. Gratitude burned in my throat, not for what she brought, but for the reminder that love doesn't always come from blood. Sometimes it shows up quietly, holding a Target bag and asking nothing in return. That night, I didn't leave the hospital. I pulled the stiff recliner close to Ethan's bed, wrapped myself in a scratchy hospital blanket, and listened to the soft hiss of the ventilator. I kept talking to him, just like the nurse suggested. Told him about the aquarium trip we never took, about the goofy seahorse socks he loved, about the time he dressed as a marine biologist for Halloween, and told every neighbor he was Dr. Ethan. And somewhere between stories, I whispered the words I hadn't said out loud in years. I've got you, no matter what it costs me. Because in that moment, I meant it with every fiber of my being. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of monitors beeping steadily. Ethan's steady, unnatural rhythm. I hadn't slept so much as drifted in and out, my neck aching, my back numb from the recliner. But I hadn't left his side. I wouldn't. A nurse named Dana brought me black coffee and a soft "good morning." Her kindness almost cracked me, but I held it together because falling apart felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time it was my dad, Robert Monroe, soft-spoken, steady, the only quiet presence in a childhood full of tension. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, his voice already thick. "Your mother told me you two had a disagreement." I stared at the wall. Disagreement? She told me you were being disrespectful. that you blocked her number." "I did," I said, "because she threatened to cut off Ethan's college fund unless I left his hospital room to go to Michelle's birthday brunch." The silence on the other end was long, heavy. Finally, Dad sighed. "She doesn't handle crisis well." "Dad," I said, my voice cracking, "this isn't about a crisis. This is who she is." Another pause. "I'll fly out tonight," he said quietly, "if you'll have me." Tears prickled my eyes. I nodded even though he couldn't see. "Of course." After the call, I sat there thinking about that college fund. Barbara had opened the fund when Ethan was born, at a family dinner no less. She announced it like a royal decree, listing the terms out loud. For college only, no exceptions. It wasn't a gift. It was leverage, and I should have known even then. And for years it had been my silent fallback. I never touched it, never dared to ask how much was in it, but just knowing it existed gave me something to cling to. Now it felt like one more way to keep control. One more leash she thought I wouldn't dare cut. But I had. And now I had to face the cost. Around noon, Dr. Sheridan came in, Ethan's neurologist. She was calm, confident, and didn't dance around facts. "Good news," she said. "The swelling has stabilized. We're lowering the sedation today to see if his brain responds." I clutched the arms of the chair. "What does that mean?" "It means we wait and we watch. He may respond, he may not. But this is a step forward." A step forward. It felt like oxygen after days of drowning. I watched every twitch of Ethan's fingers, every shift in the monitors, every change in his heart rate. Nurses checked in hourly. Dad texted updates about his flight. Mason's family dropped off snacks, books, even a hand-drawn card that said, "Science bros never quit." And still, Barbara said nothing. Blocked or not, she could have tried. Through Dad, through Michelle, through anyone. But she didn't. Her silence wasn't just loud. It was calculated. Around 4:30 p.m., something happened. As I sat reading one of Ethan's favorite marine life books aloud, I felt his pinky twitch beneath mine. I froze. Then it happened again. "Ethan?" I whispered. The monitor beeped a little faster. A flicker in the line. The nurse rushed in, checked his pupils, called for Dr. Sheridan. "He's responding," she said. "It's minimal, but it's real." My hands shook as I brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "You're coming back to me?" I whispered. "Aren't you?" That night, my dad arrived, gray-haired, exhausted, still carrying the same brown leather duffel bag he's had since the 80s. He walked into the room, took one look at Ethan, and pulled me into a hug so strong I nearly collapsed. "I'm here now," he said, and somehow that mattered more than I expected. Later, in the cafeteria, I told him everything about the phone call, the threat, the way I blocked her without a second thought. He didn't defend her, but he didn't condemn her either. "She comes from pride," he said softly. It's her armor, her currency. I looked at him, suddenly tired of rationalizing. Pride doesn't comfort a child in a coma, Dad. He nodded, slowly, then said the first thing that made me feel seen. No, it doesn't, but you do. You're doing exactly what she never could. And that felt like truth. The next morning started with a text from Michelle. It popped up on my screen while I was brushing crumbs off Ethan's blanket. I hadn't unblocked her, but she'd found a way through Facebook Messenger. Mom says you're skipping my party. I get that Ethan's sick, but it's just a few hours. You could have at least sent a gift. Sick. A few hours. I stared at the message like it came from another planet. Ethan had a tube down his throat. He hadn't spoken in days, and she wanted wrapping paper and a card. I didn't feel angry. I felt detached, like this was proof I'd never really belonged in their version of family. Anyway, just a few hours. Sick. I stared at the message, stunned by its cruelty, dressed in casual. My son had a tube in his chest and a machine helping him breathe. He wasn't just sick. He was inches from death. And she wanted a birthday gift? Another message came in, this time from my Aunt Laurel. It's really sad you're not showing up for Michelle. She's always been there for you. That was a lie. Michelle had always been there for Michelle. Always louder, shinier, more beloved. The golden child with a gleaming law degree and a 5-bedroom home in Orange County. And now, the whole family watched her Instagram stories while I sat beside my unconscious son, invisible. By noon, I stopped checking messages. I silenced every app, every ping, every buzz. If people wanted to grieve a missed brunch more than a child in the ICU, let them, because right now all that mattered was Ethan. Dr. Sheridan checked in again. He's breathing more independently, she said, peering at the monitor. We may be able to remove the ventilator later today, but let's see how he responds over the next few hours. Hope curled cautiously in my chest. I sat down again, opened the marine life book, and started reading from the page I'd left off. Sea otters can hold hands while they sleep so they don't float apart. And that's when I felt it. A shift. Not a twitch. Not a reflex. Ethan's eyelids fluttered. Ethan? I whispered, heart hammering. His head turned slightly toward my voice. His fingers twitched again, firmer this time. His mouth parted. I pressed the call button. Nurses rushed in. Dr. Sheridan followed, calm but alert. He's waking up, she said. Stay calm. Talk to him. Let him orient. I moved close, careful not to cry too loud. It's me, buddy. It's Mom. I'm right here. His eyelids opened again, glazed, disoriented, but open. I laughed. I cried. I kissed his forehead. His first word was barely a rasp. Mom. The ventilator was removed a few hours later. Ethan's voice was weak, slow, but clear. dreamed about turtles. I smiled, tears still falling. You're back, I whispered. You came back to me. He nodded, then closed his eyes again, resting. Not unconscious, just tired and alive. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hospital windows, I stepped out into the hallway to breathe. I hadn't realized how shallow I'd been breathing for days. Now, I could finally exhale. That's when I saw them. My mother and Michelle, standing near the nurses' station like they owned the building. Hair perfect, lipstick bright, matching beige trench coats, like they were stopping by a charity auction. I didn't move. Michelle spotted me first. There you are, she said, as if I'd been hiding. Mom followed close behind. We've been trying to reach you, she snapped. Michelle's party was a disaster, by the way. People asked where you were. I stared at her, speechless. My son was in a coma. She waved her hand like brushing away dust. Yes, and thank God he's okay now. But you really could have been there for at least an hour. You embarrassed the family. Something in me went still. Not cold, clear. I took a step closer. I didn't show up for brunch because I was holding my child's hand while he fought to stay alive. Michelle rolled her eyes. Drama. Mom's voice sharpened. You've always had a way of twisting things to make yourself the victim. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply said, you have 5 minutes to see him, one at a time, and only if you can keep your judgments outside this room. Mom stared, stunned. You're serious? I nodded. Dead serious. Back in the room, I watched from the corner. They smiled at Ethan, complimented his strength, tried to play the role. But I saw it, the disconnection, the unfamiliarity. Ethan looked more confused than comforted. And in that moment, I knew. Family isn't who shows up for cake. It's who shows up when everything else is falling apart. Ethan's recovery wasn't a miracle. It was a battle. Slow, painful, and humbling. He couldn't sit up without help. His words came in whispers, then in stutters. His memory flickered, skipping over days and people like stones on water. But every blink, every squeeze of my hand, every attempt at a sentence felt like a victory. And I celebrated them all. We spent another 9 days in the hospital. 9 days of physical therapists gently coaxing movement from his legs. 9 days of nutritionists adjusting his meals by the ounce. 9 days of me refusing to leave that recliner, no matter how stiff my back became. Dad stayed for most of it, sleeping in the visitor lounge, bringing me lukewarm coffee and bad jokes. He didn't talk much about Barbara. Neither did I. Her 5-minute visit was the last time I saw her. 2 weeks after Ethan woke up, I got the email. Subject line: termination of educational trust, effective immediately. No explanation, no conversation. Just a digital signature and a legal seal. I stared at it for a long time, reading and rereading until the words blurred. It was done. Barbara had followed through. The college fund, once my silent reassurance, the thing I clung to when bills stacked up, was gone. I stared at the screen, wondering if one day Ethan would hate me for it, for choosing his breath over his future. But then I remembered what he'd whispered that morning. Mom, you stayed the whole time. And I held on to that, because love like that doesn't need permission. I sat in the hospital cafe that afternoon, phone in hand, trying to steady my thoughts. Would Ethan ever understand? Would he resent me later for choosing his life over his tuition? But then I remembered what he said that morning while sipping juice with shaky hands. "Mom, you stayed the whole time." I smiled. No scholarship, no inheritance, no trust fund could ever replace that. Once Ethan was stable enough, we were discharged. The apartment looked smaller than I remembered, dustier, like the whole world had gone on living while we held our breath. But it was home, and we were alive. The next weeks were a blur of follow-ups, therapy sessions, slow walks with a cane. My coworkers at the school filled our fridge with groceries. The science teacher dropped off a marine life model kit just in case he feels up for building something. Mason came by every weekend. I picked up photography again, something I'd once given up when Ethan was born. Back then, I used to take pictures of his tiny feet, the curl of his fingers, the way he slept with his mouth open like a baby bird. Now, I used it to pay the bills, but somehow it also helped me remember who I was before I became just Mom. It wasn't much, but it was honest, and it was mine. One evening, Ethan and I sat on the couch, flipping through a picture book of Pacific wildlife. He pointed at a sea lion and said, "They stick together even in storms." I looked at him, at his thin frame, at the new scar just above his eyebrow, and I said, "Yeah, buddy, they do." Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Will Grandma still come around?" I didn't lie, but I didn't lash out either. "I don't know," I said, "but I do know this. Some people show love by control. Others show it by being there." He nodded slowly. "You were there." That was all he said, but it was enough. Meanwhile, Barbara's silence continued. No calls, no cards, no check-ins. Michelle sent a box of clothes Ethan had outgrown years ago, likely a last-minute gesture more for image than care. Dad kept in touch, quiet, steady, loyal in his own quiet way. He never defended her again. One day he simply said, "You were right to draw the line. I should have done it years ago." By the time Ethan's birthday rolled around that summer, he had ditched the cane, started sketching sea creatures again, and asked if we could go to the aquarium just like we planned before everything. So we did. He wore his old scuba diver costume from Halloween. I brought my camera. We held hands through the jellyfish tunnel like nothing had ever broken us. But we knew better. We weren't the same. We were stronger. By midsummer, Ethan was walking on his own. A little slower than before. A little more cautious. But each step felt like a rebellion against everything we were told might not happen. His hair had started to grow back where the bandages once were. His laugh returned too. First quiet, then louder, then full-throated, when he and Mason joked about building an underwater robot out of junkyard parts. Watching him move through the world again was like breathing after weeks underwater. As for me, I worked. Harder than I had in years. I picked up weekend photography at street fairs, local races, pet portraits. I started building a small online portfolio and marketed myself through a Facebook group for Phoenix creatives. It didn't pay much, but it was growing. And more importantly, it was mine. I also went back to my school job in the fall, part-time at first, then gradually increasing hours. The principal gave me a flexible schedule. "You've earned it," she said, placing a hand on my shoulder. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough. And after everything that had been taken from us, Enough felt like a gift. One afternoon, while reviewing photos from a local 5K run, I got an email from Barbara. Subject line, "Let's talk." I stared at it. No greeting, no softness, just 2 words. Part of me wanted to delete it on sight. Another part opened it. The message was short, clinical. "I'd like to visit Ethan. I believe we've both had time to reflect. Michelle would also like to join. We can meet at your place or neutral ground. I hope you'll be reasonable." Reasonable. As if love had ever been reasonable in her hands. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I made tea, sat on the balcony with Ethan, and asked him what he remembered most from the hospital. He thought for a moment, then said, "You reading the fish book and telling me it was okay to be slow." I smiled. "Do you remember who visited?" He nodded. "Grandma came. She was weird, like nervous. She didn't ask me anything, just smiled a lot." I let that sit. Then I asked, "Do you want to see her again?" He was quiet for a long time, then, "Only if she says sorry for hurting you." That was it. That was everything. The next day I replied, "Ethan is still healing physically and emotionally. You're welcome to write him a letter, but we're not ready for visits, not because of anger, because we're learning what peace feels like, and for once, we're not willing to trade it away." Barbara never replied. Michelle left a voicemail a week later, her voice flat. "We were trying to extend an olive branch, but if you want to stay distant, that's on you." I listened once, then again, and then I deleted it. Not out of anger, but because I finally understood. Some bridges aren't burned. They're never built right in the first place. That fall, Ethan started middle school. He joined the science club again. He presented a project on deep-sea bioluminescence with glowing pride. And at the end of his presentation, he held up one of my photos, an edited picture of jellyfish he'd helped me take at the aquarium. The class applauded, he beamed, and I cried, silently, in the back row. Later that night, as we walked home under the wide Arizona sky, he reached for my hand. "I'm glad you picked me," he said. I squeezed his fingers gently. "Always." And I meant it. That winter, we didn't do anything big for the holidays. No tree covered in ornaments. No glittery wreath on the door. Just Ethan and me, 2 mugs of cocoa, and string lights from the dollar store draped along the windowsill. It was quiet, gentle, safe, and it was the first time in years I didn't feel like I was performing for anyone. The phone stayed mostly silent. Barbara never called. Michelle never wrote. And after a while, I stopped expecting them to. Not out of bitterness, but because the silence had stopped hurting. People talk about moving on like it's some dramatic act. Cutting off, letting go, starting fresh. But healing isn't loud. It's in the little things. It's in watching your son tie his shoes without help after months of therapy. It's in not flinching when you see a family photo that used to make you feel small. It's in choosing peace, even when no one apologizes. Ethan asked about the college fund once. We were organizing some paperwork for school, and he stumbled across the old envelope labeled Trust Account, Barbara Monroe. "Is this still a thing?" he asked. I sat down beside him, honest. "No, it's not." He blinked, processing, then shrugged. "Okay, I'll just earn my own scholarship." It was so simple, so free. That moment told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't carrying her shadow. He wasn't waiting for her money, her approval, or her love. He had mine. And sometimes that's enough to unlearn a lifetime of damage. The following spring, I booked my first solo exhibit, a gallery that featured family portraits in low-income communities. Photos that weren't posed, but real. Mothers holding toddlers in laundromats, grandfathers fixing bicycles on back porches, siblings playing in parking lots after school. Love, without the filters, without the rules. The night of the opening, Ethan came with me. He wore a button-down shirt and the same crooked smile James used to have. When he stood in front of a photo titled After the Storm, a black and white image of a child gripping his mother's sleeve, he whispered, "This one feels like us." I nodded. "It is." We walked home that night under the stars. No drama, no ghosts, just me, my son, and a sky big enough to hold everything we lost and everything we found. And if you've made it to the end of this story, maybe you've had to choose between family loyalty and self-worth. Maybe you've been guilted for setting boundaries. Maybe you've loved someone who used support as currency. If so, I see you. And I'll tell you what I told Ethan that night. Real love doesn't come with strings. It just shows up and stays. We may have lost a college fund, but we gained something far richer, a life without conditions, a bond without fear, and a future that finally belonged to us.